I'm Richard Schreiber, and today with us is Dr. Esther Hess, who I'll introduce in a moment. This is the Autism Care Podcast coming to you live by recording. And we're really especially happy to have Dr. Hess with us from Los Angeles. She is a renowned developmental psychologist with over 30 years experience, specializing in assessing and treating developmental and regulatory disorders such as autism spectrum disorders. My daughter, of course, was born with autism, and our foundation is dedicated towards helping other parents with children and adults on the spectrum, holistic, homeopathic, and tech-oriented solutions. So Dr. Hess is no doubt well-versed in that space as well. Dr. Hess is executive director of the Center for Developing Mind in Los Angeles, where she employs the DIR Floortime model, which is a developmental and relational play therapy approach. Beyond her professional endeavors, Dr. Hess is also an accomplished singer with over 25 years of experience, which is incredible for this former high school choir and band player, having a respect for music. Before we move on to some of the more compelling questions about your amazing work, I know you're in town and you're actually going to be performing at Carnegie Hall.
Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. If you're a New Yorker worth your salt, of course, and probably even beyond New York, but performing on the Carnegie Hall stage is like the Mecca. I mean, I've been blessed to see so many artists perform there over the years, both in pop, rock, folk. And of course, as I mentioned, my roots are in more classical music. So what kind of music are you going to be singing and performing?
We're going to be doing a lot of music,
Wonderful.
actually. Works by Handel and Monteverdi and Vivaldi.
Wow.
And it's going to be, it's very, very much a dream come true. And without a question, it's a tremendous bucket list check-off spot.
That's amazing. Vivaldi's Four Seasons is one of my all-time favorites that I just love putting that on. And it's spring, so it's
It is indeed
a good time to
We're going to
listen
be doing the Magnificat.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, congratulations to anyone who's performed on that stage. It's a pretty special place. And I know decades ago, they actually redid the sound system there. So it's now just spectacular.
Thank you.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I want to turn now to, you had a recent trip in the Middle East, a landmark trip for you, where you spread the good word and I believe helped families who were challenged with some elements of discourse in their lives. You want to tell us a little bit about what your work was there?
Absolutely. Been to Israel at least a dozen times. But each time I go, the situation just calls us to refine and refine and refine
Sure.
the needs of the population. About 2 years ago, I was actually trained by World Authority on War and Siege in a city called Kiryat Shmona, which is in the northern part of Israel near the Lebanese border. That was a really interesting trend because I was able to get the trauma-based type of.
So you were saying about your amazing
Yeah.
trip to Israel this time?
It was outstanding. And each time we go, we refine the needs of the population, particularly the special needs community. 2 years ago, I was asked to work with Ukrainian refugees. And so before we left for Poland, because at that point, that's as far as you could go in terms of the ongoing war, I was trained extensively by a wonderful World Authority on childhood trauma associated by war and siege. His name is Dr. Moli Lahad in a city called Kiryat Shmona, which ironically had to be evacuated this past war between Israel and the offensive. What happened was that I also added my special needs element. So I became pretty proficient in working with trauma and special needs population, which wasn't getting a lot of press.
Right.
Just given the fact that the whole country was under siege.
But it's especially hard on people with special needs.
Absolutely.
Because it just ratchets up the trauma, the anxiety, and the impact. I can't imagine it.
Absolutely. I mean, just in terms of having whatever structure that you need to run your life, and then having no structure or structure being abruptly having to do left and right turns, which is not the forte of most persons, on the spectrum. And so I just had an extraordinary experience. Both my husband, who is a specialist in adults with developmental delays and the Down syndrome, he and I traveled together extensively. And so we had just an incredible trip. when we were in Poland, and I have maintained an ongoing relationship with the clinic that I established there and a school, and I meet with them every Monday morning. At my time in LA, it's about 6, when their time about 3, and it kind of works. I'm an early riser, so it works. But we do clinical supervision. So I thought that the ongoing war in the Middle East necessitated for us to continue to give back and do the same thing.
Sure.
And so we were contacted to, see if we could come out. We were arranged, and I was very pleased because we set up, our goal was to set up therapeutic teams to reach out to as many people as possible. And then to do the same thing what we're doing with, with our Polish counterparts, to go ahead and then had as many opportunities to have virtual supervision. Because again, whereas my Hebrew is actually pretty good, I wasn't in Israel long enough to do clinical work. So I work with the clinical team, I train trainers. They then in turn are training other trainers, and we're just expanding the team. And so we established a lot of multiple teams all over Israel. They had some extraordinary experiences, both particularly in the south of the country, not too far from where the actual invasion point started, and they had a hottie slave Gaza, a lot of trial points. And then we also worked in Jerusalem. We really worked all over the country. So it was a very profound experience, and we've been asked to go back again, and I think we're probably going to do so before the end of the year.
Oh, that's wonderful. Both Israelis and Palestinians suffered a lot in this exchange.
Yeah.
And of course, living in Israel is kind of a different experience than any of us would ever.
Without question.
I was with a religious group, and we were supposed to travel to Israel back in fall. But because of the war, we ended up diverting to Greece.
Okay.
Tracing the steps of St. Paul and different places, which was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Greece is just beautiful. Missed Israel, and I'm hoping we can go back.
I would really encourage it. I mean, I will tell you that we lucked out in the sense that when we were there, I would say the middle of the night, and we had left at I guess it's a 1 a.m. flight back to Los Angeles. And later that day, the ceasefire kind of broke down, and the missiles did fall again. But I'm optimistic that there will be some solution. But regardless, there's a lot of repair to do. And so I would absolutely encourage you to try again. And it's an extraordinary experience. We've traveled all over the world in our assistance, families with special needs. There's really no place quite like that.
And I know that there's a lot of really great advancements in autism care coming out of Israel. It's obviously a very forward-thinking, very advanced. So what are some that you've come across? Some of those?
I think, you mentioned about your daughter, and you were kind enough to share a little bit of her story, and she's 19 at this point. Yep. Well, I think most parents can relate to the fact that when their children are young, as hard as it is to first, wrap your head around the idea there's a diagnosis, there is a kind of plan. You can sort of know, in fact, I'm a former board member of Autism Speak, and they come up with the first 100 days once you hear a diagnosis and so forth. The dilemma is that once a person on the spectrum is hitting late adolescence, they finish high school anywhere from, say, 20 to 21, 22, then there's this terrible cliff that they fall.
It's called the cliff, in fact. There's an organization called OPWD. I'm terrible with acronyms, but I believe it's the Office of Persons with Developmental Disability.
Okay, right.
And in this state, you probably have a commensurate in California, because I know California is a very forward state in terms of autism care.
Sure.
I had a dear friend who was living in Utah for 7 years and just had to get back to California because the autism care in Utah was really substandard.
Yeah.
But in any event, that agency provides a lot of interesting kinds of supports. My daughter has a service cat that we're all joking whether she'll take it with her when she goes away. She's going to an art school this fall in Baltimore.
Okay. That's my old hometown.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Yeah, it's the college, MICA is the acronym. It's the Maryland Institute College of Fine Art.
Terrific. Okay.
So, she's a brainiac. She could have been a STEM student as well as in arts, but she's into cartooning and animation, and that's the whole thing. So hoping and praying. I happen to be a consultant in that space.
Mm.
But yeah, so as far as she was concerned, she's really advanced and done a lot of hard work herself. But for other kids, yeah, once you hit that cliff, and then of course, younger adults that need special home care that they can't necessarily live at home or by themselves. I think our daughter will be able to live by herself if she brings a catalog and they have a symbiotic relationship. It's so funny. But I know for a lot of kids, that's challenging. And, of course, we kind of, as our daughter aged and got older, God is so good. We were so blessed that our daughter matured and learned to self-regulate, learned to become much more sociable, and now has a best friend. And, I get a little choked up about it because obviously a dad's job, after all, is to make sure that his daughter is set up in life and can be independent, free thinking. And my daughter's all of that. I don't take any credit for that, but she's all of that.
That's wonderful. But so you're asking about Israel. So there are a lot of adult programs, which are great. And we went to a particularly interesting Hebrew word is moshav, but I guess it is meaning like a settlement, basically. And just for occasion's sake, it's about 12 kilometers from the city of Beersheba, about 20 miles south of the Nova, what everybody I can identify with. But what they have is a terrific rehabilitation center. So part of it is orthopedic, part of it is dealing with co-op soldiers who've lost limbs and are learning to rebuild their lives. Part of it, though, has a terrific mental health department. And it starts with an all-inclusion nursery school that goes all the way through high school. And then they want to make sure that persons on the spectrum are employable. So they start training with all different kinds of jobs and opportunities. So, for example, they have a huge garden center where they import vegetables. And actually, the bulk of the income of the particular settlement comes from the special needs venture, where they have acres and acres of different farmland and where they're growing everything from tomatoes that have been, what is it when they raise them, Alan? My husband is everybody, the water hypotonic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the special tomato processing to do all different kinds of fruits and vegetables. And that is the major part of the income. So young individuals are learning, starting in high school, how to work in the field, how to then process and pick seeds, and how to go ahead and package. So they have ongoing employment.
Wonderful.
That particular shop has become so popular that now a city is starting to grow up around it.
Wow.
And so these individuals, and some very important that the inclusion theme is that if you expose neurotypical individuals to a neurodivergent population early, it's becoming a normal and natural part of their life. And so that's a piece that just is one example. I mean, and on site they have, you mentioned about your daughter's cat. They have a therapeutic riding program, for example, and a canine program.
My daughter rode horses when she was younger. Horses are so empathetic; they connect with their owner.
Yeah,
she used to brush its hair and lead it around, and it was just wonderful for her.
It's just the general movement kind of organized. That's right. So this is, I mean, that's what's on site in particular. Absolutely. Just as a small example, that there are facilities left and right who are recognizing the need to address this cliff and to actually provide different opportunities, including, for example, in the military. So that in Israel, I'm not sure it's 100% mandatory. Let's call it 85% mandatory to go into the army. People have choices. And persons who were neurodivergent did not have that option. So they now have army units specific to the neurodivergent, and so they can go ahead now, and usually you're not going to go on the front line. For example, they're going to be using skills for those who are particularly excellent at picking out the small details. So they are being involved with military intelligence so they can see the difference. Did the enemy's lines change, for example?
The same way they're good at reading x-rays or MRI.
Exactly. No, quickly. And so that, for example, is increasing. I think right there, we are learning
Yeah.
a lot.
I think one of the key attributes you mentioned is what I love to hear. And I know I talked to a lot of people in the autism space that I met with, a woman from Israel, is the fact that they commingle people that are neurotypical with people who are neurodiverse.
Right away. Yeah.
And they create that kind of harmony.
Mm.
And they learn from each other.
Absolutely.
And that's my daughter was able to go to Art and Design High School here in New York. After experiencing being bullied in middle school and the experience I talked about earlier in elementary school, high school for her was a godsend. Her high school had 23% of the kids were neurodiverse. And the principal was a Filipino man, very progressive, but it was a perfect environment for her because she sat side by side with her neurotypicals and they all were.
But they all work together.
And that's what's so important and what's often so missing.
Right.
Is that in our culture here, and certainly it's a lot worse around the world rather than America, is this separation, this containerization of people with special needs, especially in schooling versus those who are neurotypical, when they can learn from each other.
So that definitely is a push that Israel's been doing. And I'm very pleased because, Jed, I don't think I saw any nursery schools that didn't have some sort of inclusion element to it. So we were very, very good.
I'm part of a project that's a startup in the AI in the learning space. It really started with a group that I know of in Florida that does learning for kids with disability and even in the assistive device space. And I think one of the unique things that our ultimate product, if you want to call it, our AI learning platform, is that it will have an e-learning component. But again, the idea is not to have separate classrooms, to have everyone perform the same curriculum in parallel, just everyone gets kind of their own customized lesson plan, but they could sit next to one another. They could help each other.
Kind of like a concierge of academic.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So I want to talk a little bit about DIR Floortime, which you're obviously an expert in. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how it's effective in, I guess, the therapy role play that it benefits kids on with spectrum and sensory challenges.
So DIR Floortime is a developmental relational approach. And it was established by my mentor, Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and his partner, Serena Weider. And basically, it is the possibility to woo a child into an interactive experience. Now, in contrast to more cognitive-based, where, for example, if a child behaves or according to plan, they get a coin and a point, a cookie or something, you become the cookie, the relationship. Because what was happening, and again, he is most closely associated with applied behavior analysis. And he and Dr. Greenspan actually were dear friends. There is a point of compliment where you do, and for example, in an academic situation, you have to sit down and you have to organize a certain way. But what was happening was that individuals and the behaviors were the first to notice, they weren't able to help these kids generalize the behavior-oriented skills into more of a social and emotional expansion. And that's basically what we do. So what we're doing is we are making our relationship primary. And, the secret of any kind of therapy is how kids get better is because they have somebody who validates them. They have somebody who believes in them, and they have somebody who is fun to hang out with. And so they want to spend more time. The longer we get a child to be in an interactive back and forth experience, the greater the possibility to learn. Dr. Greenspan set out several principles of Floortime, including the awareness. It's actually called DIR Floortime, meaning that, D stands for development. If I close my eyes, for most kids who come in fact, I've been dealing with a number of children who were challenged this past week. And if I close my eyes and say, okay, well, this individual is approximately late teens. If I close my eyes, I really think that this person is much younger. So if I say, come on, be big, be 16, because that's chronologically where you are. But for whatever reason, you're having a bad hair day. And right now you're about 12. Well, you see this enormous inability to connect emotionally. On the other hand, if I go ahead and say, okay, well, for some reason, some individual neurological difference that DIR, is interfering. So let me down here. Let me support that individual neurological difference the best way that I possibly can. And I'm using R, which is probably the most important element, my relationship with the child, because we act as Pied Pipers, again, to potentially woo that child into this interactive experience. And then hopefully, with a lot of persistence and a lot of love, you pull that child up to the optimum developmental capacity. Then it's time to play. Then we get down on the floor and we do our thing.
I know AVA services have
Yeah.
gone a little bit controversial. Our experience with our daughter was kind of mixed. For about a year and a half, she had a wonderful counselor who was a young woman working on her PhD at the time. But she had a sister who was the same age as our daughter, fully on the spectrum. So she really bonded well with my sister and kind of deviated from the script, if you will.
Sure.
And because she, to your point, she focused more on the connection, the relationship, and the set of behaviors that oftentimes these services are criticized for, and trying to take someone with autism and modify their behaviors to more neurotypical. But is that also kind of your experience?
Absolutely. Because as I said, you want to hang out with somebody who believes in you, who supports you, where it's kind of fun to be with. And at the same time, also pushes you just enough so that you are moving forward in whatever development pathway that means.
Yeah, I noticed with my daughter, she is able to do that. She's able to push herself. She's able to grow. She's able to become bigger and more learning. And I think a lot of that may have had its roots in that relationship that she had back in the day. With over 3 decades in developmental psychology, what are some of the significant changes you've observed in the understanding and treatment of autism students?
So many. Well, the top 3. I mean, the most obvious. We don't institutionalize kids on the spectrum anymore. I think that was the most glaring problem because we didn't know what to do. So we locked them away. And one of the things that is unfortunate is when Ella and I are traveling around the world, we still come in contact with individuals recently worked in some very rural areas of Africa, for which there's a lot of infanticide when a child is fortunately recognized that something's wrong, but they don't know what to do with, or shut away. And so that doesn't generally here anymore. So that, I think, probably is the most wonderful recognition. And then also, I think it's an important piece to recognize, and I say this in contrast to, like, for example, with the work I'm doing in different parts of the world, where I'm working with the families in Poland, the clinical teams. We really incorporate family. That's probably one of the most important things. It's not about dropping your kid off, but you fix it. I have a policy at our center. I run a multidisciplinary treatment facility back in Los Angeles called Center for the Developing Mind. And I had a contract with my parents for the first probably 13, 14 years of a child's life until the child is an adolescent and says, okay, Dr. Hess, I want my private space. But until then, Floortime is a lifestyle. It's not just simply a technique. I spend an hour and a half with families at least once a week, depending on the health severity. And I get the families on the floor where I'm teaching them these techniques.
The family is not just...
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I like to say that I've yet to meet a child who lives alone. Right? And so if one child has autism, everyone in the family is impacted by autism. So I think that's a major shift as well. We recognize the need to expand services to really include the entire family.
Family is so important. Of course, the cliche of it takes a village. We're blessed. My wife is one of 5 sisters. Her dad was from Puerto Rico. Her mom's from Peru. So the Spanish culture is just wonderful. It's such a blessing to me because they welcomed me into their family without hesitation, which is a tall order in itself. But my daughter has 4 or 5 cousins, now 7 or 8 actually, but 3 or 4 of them are around the same age. And to see the dynamic that developed over the years between them, it is just super special. And the way that, she's able to be herself. Nothing is more beautiful than the freedom to be.
Right. Absolutely.
And it's meant a lot to her and to us. Yeah.
One last piece I want to mention, I guess the newest piece, is an understanding of what's called self-determination, where certainly in California, different funding is being found for individuals and their families who are neurodivergent. And so finally, families are able to afford them. Having a child on the spectrum is also a very expensive proposition. And so now agencies are stepping forward, they're recognizing the need. And under this understanding of self-determination, families are being able to have payment made directly to the clinician and thereby saving themselves multiples of dollars.
Yeah.
But getting the services that they need, which is pretty amazing. I'll mention one more piece. I think children of color are also now of late being recognized and diagnosed.
They used to be years behind.
Absolutely. And one of the major understandings, for example, why the numbers are so low, I mean, at this point, it's 1 every 36 child born in the U.S. by the time their age is going to be diagnosed with the spectrum. Part of the understanding is because now children of color are being recognized, being diagnosed, until that dropped the numbers, but of necessity.
Yeah. I know that the number that's a kind of a question that people refer back to is that, 10 years ago was 1 in 1,000.
Yeah.
I know that 1 in 36, I think, of the CDC number from 2022, say.
Yeah.
Individual states like New York and New Jersey report like 1 in 23.
Yeah.
It's even higher. And they expect that it may at some point even break the 20 mark, 1 in 20 kids with the spectrum. It's also controversial that no one seems to know the cause of autism reliably.
We have greater understanding genetically. In my mind, I think it's a combination of genetic propensity and environmental opportunity, and they just collide.
It's interesting because it's called an autism spectrum, but I'm by no sense a neuroscientist, an amateur at best. But, what I have read suggests that we all have a unique neurological composition.
Yeah.
And I remember reading an article not too long ago about the dozen or so characteristics of someone who's on the spectrum. I said, oh my gosh, I have 7 or 8 of them. I don't, to a certain degree, but again, that's why it's a spectrum. Just like the light is a spectrum, infinite number of waves and different lights. But I know people who are on the spectrum don't like it when people who are neurotypical try to empathize with them by saying, yeah, I know where you are. I do the same thing. I forget, I lose track of things, but I think there's something to be said for that.
I am agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you. I mean, there's an expression, you've seen one child with autism, you've seen exactly one child with autism. Meaning that what's striking to me is that it is a very, very diverse spectrum of who are being impacted. And I think that what's nice now is that treatment plans are being created to deal with the specifics of the individual who is in front of each of us. Yeah.
For sure. Let's circle back to the Center for the Developing Mind. What inspired you to establish the disciplinary facility? What sets it apart?
I thank you for asking. Well, first off, you have to be married to a wonderful partner, and I have to my husband, because we established our center. I'd been, Center for the Developing Mind approximately close to 40, almost 45 years at this point, but maybe 20 years, maybe almost 25. Families kept saying, "Come on, Dr. Hess, when you have a child on the spectrum, it is such an expansive, impactful kind of disorder where so many different parts of a child's brain is being impacted. So you have the need for speech and language, educational therapists, occupational therapists, oftentimes certainly mental health, and on and on. And parents were running from here to there. Can't you just have one place where everything is under one roof?" And I would share these ideas with my husband, who is an actualizer, and come up with an idea, I'm going to make it actually happen. And so under his wonderful guidance, we worked together as a team and made it happen. So I think we just celebrated our 17th year in our site. And what sets us apart is I do think we create an environment. It created the opportunity for children and families, and really actually we treat now from birth all the way through the spectrum. We started out as a 0 to 5 program, But then our kids got older and all right, we have to grow with them now throughout the lifespan of individuals. That's a part. Also, we are really one of the few places that treats across all ages. We also expand to include all members of the family. We work in tandem with a lot of different therapies and different models of intervention and are very complementary. So, for example, we have a state-of-the-art gymnasium, and our occupational therapists will work hand in hand with mental health or speech and language simultaneously, because when kids move, they have easier access to language, for example. And so we are very fluid and work well together. We have weekly case conferences by all the team members, and everybody is giving their ideas from their particular discipline, how to expand the world of a child. That's a pretty neat place to work. We also have a great internship program for kids all over the world who come in and want to thinking about becoming a development specialist in their specific field. And so we have kids we start off, some kids are coming in from high school, some kids are going on to medical school, some kids are going into different aspects of graduate work. And so we're expanding and continuing to train and teach. And that led to our international component. So we're never bored.
You have interns who are on the spectrum. Do you see? Yeah. Sure. They're looking to help out their brethren.
Well, it's interesting. Yes. And sometimes they don't know that they're on the spectrum. And so it's been interesting.
Because discovery maybe.
Sometimes point of discovery, I had a gentleman actually, very lovely fella and very bright. And he was working with a particular child. We work in clinics, we work in school systems, we work in the home. And he came to me in confidence and he said, you know what, Dr. Hess, I've been thinking about a child I'm working with. I see a lot of me and him. Do you mind if I talk about me for a moment? And we did. And there was a discovery point. And so we certainly have those experiences, as well. We also have family members who discover that too. A lot of different kinds of couple groups, including people who often they have a neurodivergent partner and a typically developing partner. And that may be a point of discovery, like a parent will say, you know what, I was just like that. And so then we deal with those issues as it impacts marriages, because we also know the incidence of having a child on the spectrum increases the risk for marriage to dissolve, until we really work very hard to make sure that we have a supportive environment around the entire family.
Yeah, I've heard that marriages where there is a special needs child have a much higher divorce rate than those. I think a lot of it too depends on what your background is. My wife and I, and that's one of the things that I discovered in writing our book, Autism Care Revolution, was it's an important component is to get parents to get out of the blame game, and if they are, fundamentally devout. I mean, my wife and I never looked at our daughter as a bird. We saw her as what she was, God's gift to us. And we were so grateful. And, subsequently who she is and those differences. For me personally, it was life-changing because it pushed me out of my comfort zone to become an advocate for her and then ultimately for others.
Yeah.
And without my daughter, that never happened.
100%. I will tell you that it is completely the more typical story where you have wonderful programs that have been created and introduced because parents like yourself have made the discovery they have a child on the spectrum and they don't have necessarily other programs. So they have to become creative and they are, really, they lead us, into the next set of wonderful programming and innovation.
I know AI is a big player in that space.
Absolutely.
And I could talk a bit about that, but it's very gratifying to see. And as I said, a lot of advances coming out of Israel, Australia, all around the world, not just America. You also emphasize the importance of addressing bullying, which from my daughter's own experience, she went to here in New York, there's a joint NYU Board of Ed program called NEST. Not sure what the acronym stands for, but in essence, it is a program that NYU's Autism Support and Research Division trained teachers on how to interface with or teach kids on the spectrum. My daughter participated in that program in middle school where there was a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher in every classroom. And we thought that was a novel thing and a great experience. The problem was she was bullied in the school because kids are smart. And middle school is a difficult time. Kids don't have any filters. They haven't yet developed the capability to understand their expressions, that they can be harmful, hurtful, or whatever. They're just very raw. They kind of discover. And we had a terrible experience. And we ultimately had to transfer our daughter out of the school because it got to a point where, someone tried to push her down a staircase.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
My daughter is the sweetest child. She actually had compassion for those who abused her. She knew they came from this in New York City. It was a school in East Harlem, so some of the kids came from one-parent families and had issues. But I know it's a real thing.
Yeah. If you're a neurodivergent individual, the chances of being bullied have been ratcheted up so many levels. Cyberbullying particularly is so devastating because a lot of our kids are so lonely that they seek out companionship, in whatever fashion. And oftentimes the computer offers something that's viable and sometimes more preferable to in three-dimensional figures because it's easy to access and hopefully nobody will harm you. But also people can take advantage of the incident, high autism, but also what we can teach in schools, how teaching staff can create different curriculum programs, how the student bodies have to be educated, how teaching a child, for example, if you stand by and watch somebody being bullied, you indeed are a bully as well.
Yeah.
And really kind of work on creating these inclusive programs. So there's that sensitivity, and it is absolutely shown with current research that there's a reduction in the incidence of bullying when you have a greater compassion that you start from the get-go so that it just becomes a normative part of your education plan.
Yeah. And again, it's so important to integrate, neurotypicals and my daughter's high school experience, as I mentioned earlier, was totally the opposite.
Right.
Kids came to her defense. Not that it ever got to that point, but she was very insulated compared to her earlier experience. What guidance do you offer to support adaptive interpersonal relationships during that period?
Can you be a little more specific in terms of what?
I guess it's as kids on the spectrum advance to adulthood. They get to a point where they're thinking about working, where they're living, relationships. When life kind of gets a little bit more complicated and a little bit more advanced.
And it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think first off, we talk about it. It's not unusual for me to see, child and they have some successes in life and they go on to other therapeutic interventions and then they return to me about the things I was talking about because life gets very complex. We practice about different opportunities, both socially, if there's higher educational opportunities, job market. Unfortunately, there aren't always as many opportunities as we would like, but we look to what is out there, knowing the individual, and how we're going to really create a program that is carved out for this individual, right? And so a lot of it is we run a peer supervision course class where the social skills have to be more complex because now we're speaking about young adults. We are intervening with programs in local junior colleges in the area so that they generally do have programs for multiple handicapped, scenarios. And so they will offer different kinds of supports, whether we need to talk to a teacher about creating an extension of an academic opportunity. In other words, instead of having an exam, done at this particular time or this amount of time, might give you more time. We really educate staff. We also take a lot of my young adults on field trips. And so we will go to look at different programs. If you have, for example, someone like your daughter who has an interest in animation and graphic arts, there are many programs. There's one excellent program in Los Angeles area called Exceptional Mindset. And that is actually started by a parent who herself was a director, realizing her child was going to need a job eventually. And so he created an opportunity to train. It's a 3-year training program for individuals who have that interest and talent to learn how to become animators and editors. And then there's a job market in the world of movies and television. Hollywood being what it is.
Sure.
And so there you have an opportunity to have a structure and be involved and invested in different kinds of experiences that you can identify with. And particularly because technology is usually a field of great interest. You know, how I got to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice. Same kind of idea with creating opportunities for neurodivergent adults. We practice, so we expose in the ways that they can tolerate to scenarios that we give them the opportunities to have as full an adult life as possible.
And we're learning that they have skills that maybe we weren't aware of. Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about they have the ability to really hone in on some very specific observations, whether it's MRI, X-rays, or just process things a bit faster. Originally, they were kind of pigeonholed into software development. There's a myriad of jobs. It's really the sky's the limit for them because they're really.
But you as a parent have to be creative and persistent, and so we are also support parents so that they can stay in the game.
Yes, that's so important because we have to discover along with our child. This has been a fantastic conversation. I have one more question, because I know you have a collaboration with the actress Mayim Bialik, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Are you speaking about Mayim Bialik? Okay.
Yeah, all of us have watched the various programs on Netflix and different series that starred actors who were either autistic or not autistic, and there's been some movies and whatnot. So I'm curious about your take on how the media present representation of the autism community is and how accurate it is.
Yeah. Right. Well, let me first speak about Ms. Bialik, and not personally connected to Ms. Bialik, although she is an incredible actress. And I think her program, The Big Bang Theory, when it was the air, was an incredibly important for people who are neurodivergent to sort of see themselves and perhaps even work out some of their own issues by watching some of these episodes, which is what I do now with my neurodivergent groups, especially age appropriate. I do think that the media is getting more in touch with showing autism in more of an inclusive program. There's wonderful films that incorporate individuals that are neurodivergent, that have specific experiences. There was one film which I really loved. It's a couple of years old. It's called Adam. It's about a young man.
Yes, I saw
You saw that one? It was wonderful.
Yeah, I love the dad figure.
Oh my gosh, and absolutely. And so to go ahead and realize that there is a tremendous opportunity for media to understand it. If the numbers are 1 in every 33rd or 36th child born in this kind of the spectrum, imagine how many people out there could use this kind of media and advertising and so forth. So people are beginning to realize that there is not only a huge market financially, but also you have an audience out there who are hungry for these kinds of opportunities. And you're seeing more neurodivergent actors who are taking to the stage too. Yeah.
Those are coming forward, like Anthony Hopkins and others.
Exactly.
That's good. Well, this has been a blessed conversation, Dr. Hess. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure.
And again, my name is Richard Schreiber. This is the Autism Care Revolution podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Dr. Hess.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, bye.